Poppy Finnegan's heart hammered against her ribs when the midnight call came. Sheila Carter's voice, cold and unyielding, crackled through the line like a curse. "You know what I want," Sheila whispered, each syllable a blade of ice. "You slip into Finn's family. Feed me every whisper they utter. If you betray me, Luna will kill Hayes." Poppy's blood ran cold at the mention of the child she adored as her own nephew. The image of Hayes's bright eyes, the softness of his cheeks against her cheek, froze her breath in her throat. No plea of innocence could break Sheila's iron promise. Poppy knew that Sheila, as ruthless as she had ever been, would do anything to protect her own twisted agenda, and Luna, unhinged by her own desperate need for power and recognition, would carry out that threat without a second thought. Terrified yet determined, Poppy hung up and stared at the silent phone in her hand, her knuckles white with fear and resolve. She had always tried to protect Hayes, to give him the childhood he deserved despite the chaos swirling around the Forrester and Finnegan dynasties. Now she faced an impossible choice: betray the Finnegans or watch her precious nephew die. As dawn crept over Los Angeles, Poppy slipped into the Finnegan home under the pretense of dropping off a casserole for Finn and Steffi. Finn greeted her with that warm, open smile that had first drawn her in so many months ago, oblivious to the storm brewing in his sister's eyes. With each casual question, "What's new at the hospital? How's Hayes's crawling coming along?" Poppy felt the weight of Sheila's demands crushing her chest. She memorized every detail of Finn's description of a new surgical technique, every laugh shared between Finn and Steffi as they marveled at Hayes's antics. At sunset, Poppy pressed her trembling fingertips to her temple in the empty hall and made the most dangerous call of her life, to Detective Baker. She whispered what she dared: Sheila's blackmail, Luna's threat, Hayes's peril, and felt a flicker of hope ignite in her chest when Baker promised to mobilize every resource. Baker's voice was firm. "Stay hidden, Poppy. We'll handle Sheila and Luna. Keep Hayes safe, no matter what." Relief and guilt warred in Poppy's heart as she hurried back inside, forcing a smile as Finn asked if she wanted to stay for dinner. Every comforting moment with the Finnegans now tasted like poison, her silence a betrayal she could barely bear. Meanwhile, deep within the labyrinth of LA's underbelly, Luna paced in a deserted warehouse, baby monitor pressed to her ear. Each gurgle from Hayes amplified her madness. She imagined Poppy's betrayal, convinced her spy would be loyal, and seethed at every drop of silence. Sheila, nowhere to be seen but always watching, had orchestrated this game with meticulous cruelty. Then, late that night, sirens wailed through the city as Detective Baker's task force moved in. Undercover cars lined the streets, plainclothes officers fanned out across Luna's known hideouts, and SWAT teams prepared to breach the warehouse where Luna had taken refuge. Poppy watched from the shadows as Baker signaled the assault. Her heart lurched with terror as fluorescent lights cut through the darkness, half a dozen officers with rifles drawn storming the building. Finn, Steffi, and Finn's mother, Lee, had been whisked away to safety by Baker's assurances, leaving Poppy free to watch the showdown. Inside the warehouse, Luna, strapped into a high stool with Hayes kicking at the air, screamed at the officers to stay back. "One step closer and he dies," she shrieked, voice twisted with panic and fury. Through the shattered windows, the task force called out negotiators, urging Luna to release the boy. Time slowed as Luna's eyes locked onto Poppy's face in the crowd, an imaginary captive or a real saboteur, she could not tell, and she sprang to her feet, brandishing a pistol. The first shot rang out, echoing across the concrete floors and steel beams, as Luna fired blindly at the advancing officers. Baker dove to cover, returning fire with calculated precision, each bullet a thunderclap in the night. Poppy felt the back and forth of gunfire like the pulse of a monstrous heart, each round bringing the threat closer to Hayes. And then came the shot that changed everything, a deafening crack that was neither from Luna's gun nor Baker's. Poppy felt searing pain explode through her side, her world tilting into darkness. Collapsing behind a rusted oil drum, she gasped, blood pooling under her as she realized in horror that she had been struck by a stray bullet meant for Luna. The warehouse erupted into chaos as Luna shrieked. The officers fired at her until her weapon dropped from her hand, and Baker sprinted to Poppy's side, cradling her as the world blurred. "Poppy, stay with me," he barked into his radio. "I need a medic now." Above the fray, Finn and Steffi burst in, summoned by Baker's urgent call. They found Poppy half-conscious, blood staining her blouse, Baker's arms around her like a shield. Hayes, freed and swaddled by another officer, was handed to Steffi, his eyes wide and uncomprehending. Finn dropped to his knees beside Poppy, his face ashen, hands trembling as he pressed towels to her wound, his voice cracking with desperation. "Poppy, baby, please hold on." In the stunned silence that followed the raid, Luna face down in handcuffs, Sheila's name whispered in detectives' reports. Poppy was lifted onto a stretcher and rushed to the nearest hospital. Finn and Steffi trailed the ambulance in Carter's sleek SUV, Steffi clutching Hayes to her chest, each breath of the infant a reminder of what was at stake. Detective Baker rode with Poppy in the ambulance, his hand never leaving her shoulder as monitors beeped her fading pulse. Though the bullet had missed vital organs, the damage was severe. Blood loss and shock threatened her life. Under the harsh lights of the ER, surgeons fought to save her, Finn pacing like a caged animal in the waiting room, Steffi praying with Hayes at her shoulder. Hours bled into an eternity until finally a doctor emerged, face grave yet tinged with relief. Poppy had survived, but her injuries would require intensive recovery, and the emotional toll would leave scars none of them could ignore. As dawn broke over Malibu, painting the sky in bruised purples and pinks, the Finnegan family gathered at Poppy's bedside, Finn holding her hand, Steffi cradling Hayes beside them, Baker leaning against the wall with quiet resolve. The air was heavy with guilt, Finn's for trusting Poppy in harm's way, Steffi's for dragging Hayes into this nightmare, Baker's for the bullet that struck the woman whose courage had saved them all. Each of them bore a piece of responsibility in Poppy's pain, and each felt the weight of the choices that had led them here. In the days that followed, Luna was remanded to a high-security psychiatric facility, labeled a danger to herself and others. Sheila Carter, implicated in the plot but not apprehended during the raid, remained at large, taunting them through cryptic messages that promised more chaos. Yet Poppy's brush with death forged a new unity within the Finnegan household. Finn refused to leave her side, turning his surgical precision to her recovery, advocating for her care with the tenacity he applied to every patient. Steffi transformed the nursery into a sanctuary of soft linens and golden light, pledging daily to shield Hayes from the shadows that had threatened him. Baker, haunted by the errant bullet, threw himself into the investigation with fresh fervor, vowing to bring Sheila to justice and to ensure no one else suffered as Poppy had. And Poppy, fragile yet unbowed, awoke one evening to find Finn reading to Hayes at her bedside, Steffi brushing her hair back with gentle fingers, Baker leaning in with the latest lead on Sheila's whereabouts. In that quiet moment, Poppy realized that although her body was mending, the true journey lay ahead, forgiving herself for the secrets she'd kept, reconciling the dual roles of protector and pawn, and trusting again in the love that had risked everything to save her life. The cliffside raid in Malibu had ended with blood and bullets, but it had also ignited a fierce loyalty that no threat could extinguish. Together, The Finnegans and their allies prepared to face the trials to come, bound by the knowledge that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not on distant hills, but within the fragile chambers of the human heart, where guilt and courage intertwine, and the promise of redemption awaits those brave enough to seize it. Hope Logan's whispered "I do" hovered in the warm summer air like a promise caught between two worlds, one forged in the glimmers of a fairy tale wedding and the other shadowed by the unspoken fears of her heart. From the moment Carter Walton had dropped to one knee on the sun-dappled balcony of his penthouse, redolent with jasmine and dipped in rose-gold light, Hope had known this was a love decreed by fate. He had shown her a vision of partnership that transcended every pain she'd ever borne, his steady devotion a balm to the memories that bound her to the past. And so, after nights spent poring over lace swatches and tasting delicate confections beneath sugar-pink blossoms, Hope had given her answer without hesitation, her hand, her heart, her forever, to Carter. The grand chapel at the Forrester estate bloomed in white orchids and peonies. The aisle was a river of satin ribbon and scattered petals. Guests whispered of the perfect union, the designer genius and the former model, two souls whose synergy would reshape the industry. Photos of their engagement, posted and reposted, glowed on screens around the world, each one more radiant than the last. Yet even as Hope traced the filigree of her engagement ring with trembling fingers, a tremor of uncertainty skimmed across her shoulder, a quiet reminder that life's most precious moments could also harbor the sharpest thorns. That very doubt crystallized into reality only hours before Carter planned to lead her to the altar. Under the soft, twilight sky, with the roses in full bloom and the candles flickering like watchful eyes, Liam Spencer appeared at Hope's door, his face drawn and pale as the moonlight that pooled on the floor. His suit was rumpled, his tie undone, and in his hand he clutched an envelope addressed in his unsteady script. Hope, startled, stepped back as though a ghost from her past had crossed the threshold. "Liam," she breathed, confusion and concern mingling in her voice. He held out the envelope, his knuckles white, the paper shaking in tandem with his breath. "You need to read this," he said, voice strained, each word a tremor of pain. Doubt turned to dread as Hope tore the seal and unfolded the pages within. The words scrawled in Liam's hand told of a tumor, aggressive and relentless, gnawing at his mind with the promise of untimely death. There was no cure yet proven, only experimental treatments whispered in hushed corners of the medical community. And precious little time. Her hands went cold. The orchestral trumpets planned for her wedding seemed a mocking fanfare now, presuming a future that may never come. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked up at Liam, her heart splitting in two. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she whispered, voice cracking. "I didn't want to ruin your happiness," he choked back. I wanted you to move on, to be happy with Carter." But in that moment of truth, every vow she'd rehearsed with Carter felt hollow, a script written for another life. Hope's world pivoted, caught between the man she loved and the man whose bravery had once enlisted her rescue, whose kindness had soothed her soul when betrayal and loss had left her adrift. With trembling fingers, she slipped the letter into her clutch, her mind racing with agony and guilt. Behind her, soft music sounded from the grand hall. Carter, unaware of the tempest gathering beyond the ivory doors, was likely checking the final details of their ceremony. Hope closed her eyes, a single tear carving a path down her cheek, and realized that by dawn she would have to choose: uphold the sacred promise she'd just made to Carter, or answer the plea of a man whose life now teetered on the brink of oblivion. As the moon lowered its pale light on the garden outside, Hope pressed her hands to her lips and whispered a prayer for guidance, knowing that whatever path she chose would fracture one of the most pivotal loves her heart had known. Carter Walton awoke the next morning to the gentle hum of morning traffic drifting through the penthouse windows, the dawn sun warming the curtains like a silent herald of celebration. A crisp white shirt waited on the bed, alongside his tailored tuxedo, immaculate and unscathed by doubt. He smiled at the sight, his chest swelling with anticipation of seeing Hope in her wedding gown, the image he had cherished for months, and leading her down that petal-strewn aisle toward their shared future. He donned his attire with reverent care, each button fastened as though sealing his promise to protect her happiness. Outside, the Forrester team arranged the final blooms, and photographers lined up to capture every smile, every tear of joy. Everything was set for the union that would be celebrated in glossy magazines and industry blogs for weeks to come. And yet, as Carter straightened his tie in the mirrored hallway, he sensed a quiet vacancy in the house, one he couldn't yet name. It was a hush that pressed against his chest, a space where Hope's laughter should have been echoing. His phone buzzed. A message from her. He opened it, expecting a sweet note or a photo. Instead, he found a single line of text. "I'm sorry. We need to talk." His heart stuttered. He tapped out a reply, "Meet me at the chapel," and sent it before regret could slow his fingers. In the garden outside the chapel, staircases bound in vines of white blooms led to a carved altar overlooking the ocean, a cathedral of nature itself. Carter's shoes clicked on the marble floor as he made his way inside, scanning for Hope among the assembled guests. The quartet's soft chord struck, and Carter felt the first prickle of dread. Hope had never been late. Each heartbeat pulsed louder until his chest felt ready to burst. Then she appeared at the threshold, her veil undone, hands trembling at her sides, eyes brimming with unshed tears. Her gown, white as winter light, clung to her in sorrow rather than in radiance. Carter rushed to her, concern overriding ceremony. "Hope, what's wrong?" he whispered, his voice thick. She met his gaze, and in her eyes he saw the flicker of a love that was not his alone, a sorrow tethered to another man. Hope swallowed, her shoulders quaking. "Carter, I can't go through with this." The words fell like stones in his chest. He closed the gap between them, searching her face for explanation, for reassurance, for betrayal. "Hope, whatever it is." "It's Liam," she said, voice breaking. "Liam's dying, Carter. He told me last night. He has a brain tumor." She pressed the letter into his hand, and he unfolded it, reading the jagged truth etched in Liam's handwriting. Frozen, Carter pressed a thumb to the page, his breath caught in his throat. The world around him faded, the chapel, the silent crowd, the soft rustle of petals, reduced to static noise. Hope clung to his arm, her tears dampening his sleeve. "I said yes because I believed in us," she whispered. "But my heart never stopped loving him." At that confession, Carter felt his own resolve unravel. He saw, in Hope's grief-stricken profile, the love she still bore for Liam, the shared history, the pain he'd borne alone to protect her. A chasm yawned between the promise he'd prepared to seal and the truth he could no longer deny. The guests watched in stunned silence as the ruin of romance played out before them. Carter turned to face the aisle, rows of family and friends, all awaiting a union that would no longer be. His mind raced. Should he insist she fulfill her vow for the sake of honor, to stand with him at the altar as the bride he deserved? Or should he release her from the weight of his love, allow her to go to Liam in his final moments, even if it branded Carter as the jilted groom, a mere standby in a story he thought was his own? Within that heartbeat decision, Carter felt the hollow ache of sacrifice. He looked at Hope, her veil trembling in the faint breeze, her lips stained with sorrow. He could see clearly then that to hold her to a promise made in ignorance would be an act of cruelty, binding her to him while her heart lay bleeding elsewhere. Yet to let her go would fracture him, leaving a scar he would carry beyond any wound of betrayal. With a steadying breath, Carter stepped back, releasing Hope's arm. The hush deepened, as if even the sea paused to witness this moment of mercy and heartbreak. "Hope," he said, voice low but unwavering, "you must follow your heart. I cannot ask you to stay when your love belongs to him." Gasps rippled through the assembled guests. Hope stumbled forward, her hand reaching for his cheek. "Carter, no," but Carter held up a hand, tears glinting in his eyes. "Go to him. Be with him in what time he has left. I won't stand in your way." His words, both freeing and tragic, broke something in Hope's heart. She threw her arms around him, pressing her face into his chest, feeling the steady beat of his sorrow. "Thank you," she murmured against his lapel, her tears soaking into his shirt. "Thank you for understanding." Without another word, she pulled away, her train of lace sweeping the marble as she turned and fled down the aisle. Carter watched her go, the letter's edge still clutched in his hand, the wedding of his dreams dissolving in the sunlight. His brethren of grief and compassion confined him to the altar, a place he would never truly occupy in his heart. As the chapel doors swung shut behind Hope's departure, the quartet struck a melancholy chord, echoing the sorrow that would reverberate through every life touched by these entwined loves. Carter remained alone at the front, a solitary figure in black, his vow to love unrequited yet worn like armor against the ache of letting go. In that charged silence, as petals lay abandoned like fallen tears, Carter realized that love's most sacred promise was not in binding vows, but in the courage to set someone free even when it meant sacrificing his own happiness. And so, on that summer morning bathed in sorrow and spent hope, Carter Walton became both the most gracious of grooms and the most broken of men, standing vigil at the end of a wedding that never was, his heart forever intertwined with the woman who had loved another.